Welcome to ICN Sunday Morning. I'm Vernon Loeb, Executive Editor. No city in America is more dependent on lead lines for drinking water than Chicago. This is becoming a huge health problem for the city, and it's also becoming a huge governance problem, it seems. Last fall, the federal government told Chicago that it had to notify 900,000 people in the city that their water was potentially subject to lead contamination. So far, as of this month, Chicago officials have only notified about 7% of those people. Also last fall, the feds told Chicago and other cities with big lead pipe problems that they would have 10 years to replace all of their lead pipes beginning in 2027. Despite this requirement, Chicago came forward with a plan in April that said it would take 50 years to do the job. Joining me this morning to talk about this is Keerti Gopal, our public health and climate reporter who's been covering this for us in Chicago. Keerti, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so you wrote a really poignant story this week about the 30th anniversary of this devastating 1995 heat wave in Chicago that killed 739 people, disproportionately Black people. And it seems from your reporting that Chicago has made progress in terms of the way it deals with extreme heat and protects people against extreme heat. But the lead pipe situation seems to be different. So the feds gave Chicago 10 years beginning in 2027 to replace all its pipes, and even said, we might give you another 10 years because you've got such a big problem there. But Chicago nonetheless then came forward and said, we're going to take 50 years to do the job. So what is happening here? Why is the city taking such a kind of relaxed approach to this really pressing health problem?
Yeah, so the rule that you mentioned, which is this EPA rule that was finalized at the end of last year, there is a little bit of a buffer period. So the 10 years, like you said, starts in 2027. And because of Chicago having so many lead service lines, it's got like over 412,000 in the city. They would get about 21 years from 2027. So technically, for the next 2 years until 2027, the city doesn't need to be replacing service lines at the speed that this rule requires. But the city's plan, which we got through a records request, that also begins in 2027 and is projecting a much longer timeline. So it's still going at less than half the speed that they'll have to go at to keep up with this EPA rule. So advocates and experts who are following this really closely, they're kind of questioning why the city wouldn't be using this buffer period to prepare for that much faster speed. To be fair, they are ramping up. They've done like about 8,000 replacements over the past 4 years. And this year they're saying they're going to do another 8,000. But if they're going to meet the federal requirement, they'll have to do nearly 20,000 a year starting in 2027. So it's a big jump.
Yeah, it almost seems that they're banking on the Trump administration to come in and rescind the Biden 10-year plan as it's rescinded so much else of the Biden environmental agenda. What is Trump likely to do here?
It's not necessarily exactly clear. The EPA rule is actually under litigation right now. So it was sued by the American Water Works Association, which is a water industry organization. And so the EPA currently hasn't said yet whether or not they'll be defending that rule. And they've asked for a couple of extensions before they make that decision. So it's not totally clear whether or not the Trump administration will uphold every aspect of that rule. And I think the 10-year requirement in particular is something that people aren't sure about. There was some movement earlier this year. Some Republican lawmakers did show signs of trying to use the Congressional Review Act to reverse the rule, but that didn't really pan out. So right now it's in effect, but there are a lot of questions about what the future of the rule will be, and also about like federal funding and the future of federal funding for these replacements. And that's something that Chicago has referenced that they're struggling with, and they've said they need a lot more support and funding in order to meet that timeline requirement. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine the Trump administration coming up with lots of new federal funding for lead pipes. But I'm wondering, has Lee Zeldin, the new administrator of the EPA, said anything about lead pipes, expressed any interest in replacing them?
Yeah, there have been some comments about replacing lead pipes and addressing lead in drinking water. But that hasn't been met with like an increased funding yet. So yeah, that's kind of unclear.
Yeah, yeah. Then there's the notification problem that Chicago has. Um, Fed said notify 900,000 people by last November that they've got a potential lead problem. Chicago notifies something like 70,000 or less by the beginning of this month. I think you quoted a lawyer in your piece as saying Chicago is brazenly violating the law. So why is there such a lack of urgency on the part of city officials here? We're just talking about notifying people.
Yeah, it's a great question because it is really urgent. In addition to it being something that we've known about for decades, like there's been lead pipes in Chicago and people have known about this and it hasn't been taken care of. The city is saying that they're doing this as fast as they can and that they're having budget issues with sending out these notifications. Um, and they've also said that they've like put out online materials that are letting people know about this, which is true. But I've spoken with many residents who either weren't aware that they had a lead service line or they weren't really sure what that means. So there's a lot of confusion and uncertainty about this still. Um, and we also did speak with the other top 9 cities in the country with the most lead service lines, and all of them but New York got back to us. And they've all said they've completed the requirement. So Chicago's doing like about 3,000 a week of these notifications, which at that rate, it's going to take them 2 years to finish. And in comparison, Milwaukee sent out more than 100,000 notifications in a single day.
Yeah. So remind us how harmful lead is to people, especially children.
Yeah, lead is a serious health hazard and it's bad for everyone. And it can damage the brain and the nervous system and reproductive health, kidney health. And it's especially dangerous for infants and really young children because it can harm brain development and cause permanent effects. In very high exposure levels in kids, it can even cause death, but there's no safe level of lead exposure. And that's something that experts are really, really clear about. And it's also important to note with this, I think, that we're talking about lead service lines a lot, which is like the pipe that brings your water from the water main to your house. But lead could also be in your internal plumbing. It could be in your faucet. It could be in different plumbing fixtures. And lead testing, if you're testing your water for lead, that's not necessarily foolproof because the lead dissolving or flaking into the water can be really sporadic. So just because you get a low test result doesn't mean you're clear. And just because you don't have a lead service line also doesn't mean you're clear. So it's really important to be filtering your water and making sure that you're using a filter that's designed to filter lead.
And you can filter it out.
Yes, you can. There are filters that are specifically designed to that. And the city of Chicago does give them out if you request them for free. And yeah, even if you don't live in Chicago, you can still look for that type of filter.
Yeah, yeah. So you grew up in New York and you went to college at Northwestern in Chicago. Um, and as a city dweller, I'm sure you're familiar with the trials and tribulations of dealing with city governments and holding them accountable and so forth. So I guess your motivation level was sort of high in working on these stories. You had no difficulties seeing the good at the end of the work process here.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of similarities between New York and Chicago as like big cities with some similar problems. But yeah, I love Chicago, and I think I fell in love with the city while I was here for school, and it just has such a strong environmental justice community and movement, and so many strong conversations, and so it's been great to be here and reporting on these issues.
Yeah, yeah. Another really noteworthy thing I think of these stories that you've done from Chicago is the fact that you've been doing them in partnership with GRIST and WBEZ. and your reporting partner, Juan Pablo Ramirez Franco from GRIST. So GRIST is an environmental newsroom just like us. They're based in Seattle. They're terrific. They're a good partner of ours. WBEZ is the big NPR station in Chicago and actually owns the Chicago Sun-Times now. So what's it been like working with these other newsrooms as partners and not competitors?
It's been so cool. It's been great to work with these other newsrooms. And it kind of the way this came about was that me and Juan Pablo realized we were both working on a really similar story. And I reached out to him and we just kind of shared notes and then decided to collaborate instead of trying to compete or like scoop each other, which I just think is really cool and kind of a sign of where journalism is going, I hope. But yeah, it's been great to be working with these other newsrooms. And I think we've been able to expand our audiences through that, and also just make it a bigger and better and deeper project.
Yeah. So what's next in the series?
Yes, we've got a couple more exciting stories coming. The next piece that we're working on is mapping where all the lead service lines are in the city and where they've been replaced. And that's something that we've been working on with our data reporter, Peter Althouse, and some of the data reporters at GRIST and WBZ as well. And it's a really interesting project and something that a lot of community members I've spoken to are interested to know about. So yeah, that's coming soon. Look out for that. We're excited about that.
Keerti, I am such an admirer of your work. Thank you so much for
Thank
being here this
you.
morning.
Thank you so
And
much. Thanks for having me.
yeah, and thanks to all of you for watching, for reading, and for supporting our work at Inside Climate News.